Suncorp is a very proud Queensland company. We have a long track record going back 100 years. It's our 100-year anniversary, and if I think back to some of the founding organisations like the Queensland Agricultural Bank, which goes back to 1902, the State Accident Insurance Office, which ultimately, after a couple of mergers, became Suncorp, and as Tim mentioned, the large merger with Metway Bank and QIDC occurred, and then more recently in 2007, the merger with Promina were fairly major events that occurred in the history of the group. But I was also going to congratulate Morgans this morning on having a very successful breakfast, and I only learnt this morning that since 1991 these breakfasts have been occurring, and it really just highlights the issue of longevity and resilience, which is really the base of what I'm going to talk about today in relation to the changes that have been occurring at Suncorp and will down the track. If I look at the S&P 500, if I go back to the year that I was born, I think the average life of a company in the S&P 500 was about 61 years. If I look at the same group of companies today, the average life is about 18 years. A massive change. And if you draw a straight line through to 2027 with that same rate of change, it would mean 3/4 of the companies in the S&P 500 in 10 years' time we won't have heard of today. They'll be new companies, which is quite staggering. And when we talk about long track records and we talk about resilience and longevity, a 100-year history, you can't take for granted that you'll just naturally be around because you've got a great brand or whatever. So let me talk about a couple of the components of why some of these changes have occurred. The first one is obviously technology, and the word disruption is frequently overused. If I think about companies like Uber, WhatsApp, Airbnb, Spotify, they have dramatically changed the landscape in a very, very short period of time for companies that have been around for a long, long time. You cannot, if I think about Borders, BlackBerry, Kodak, you cannot rely on the fact that you've been an organisation with a great history and a great brand. Had Kodak's aim been to capture life and share life, as opposed to just sell film, they of course may have been now called Instagram, and it may have been a very different picture. I'm sure you're very familiar with the Kodak story. The smartphone has also changed a lot of things. It's changed the interactions that we have with organisations, with each other. Customers are now more informed as a result. They're more connected, they're more demanding, and they help influence what we buy. Not only what we buy for ourselves, but what others buy as well. I know that whenever we stay, my wife and I stay at a hotel, my wife is always on TripAdvisor looking at how hard the beds are and what the history's been of the hotel over the last month or so in relation to service. So it's very different. And now Suncorp, when people talk about service, we don't get compared against other insurance companies and other banks. We get compared to companies like Amazon and others in different industries, entirely unrelated to Suncorp. So the metrics and the measures are very, very different. So it's no use being, having the best customer service or being the fastest insurer or the highest quality bank. It's just not going to cut it. You need to be the best in any industry to really stand out. Of course, the level of information that we get access to now is overwhelming and complex, and every sector is impacted. And the question really is about how we deal with that. And the technology change that occurs is quite rapid. And we need to look at it whether or not it's a risk or it's an opportunity. And do you adapt as it occurs, or do you in fact drive that change? And how we deal with it is really the key. Sometimes you can pick up an idea and implement it very quickly. Usually technology allows you to do that. And the consequences of what you do are quite unexpected. At Suncorp, we decided we'd do the right thing by our customers, and when there was a hailstorm coming, we thought we'd send a text message to everyone in the area to say, there is a hailstorm coming. Now, it sounds like a fantastic idea, but what we found is a whole bunch of people drove their cars out of their garages and put them on the street. So what was well-intentioned as something that we thought would help our customers, it really helped our customers. And the other thing, we talk about technology, we talk about innovation and technology in the same sentence. And when I think about it, I'm an early adopter of technology. I bought my first 3D printer about 6 years ago. I'm onto my third drone. So I like technology, but innovation is something very different to inventing the next iPhone. Innovation is doing things that solve problems. So if I think of McDonald's, they took a children's playground and they took a hamburger, they put them together and they created something that was very special that revolutionised fast food. Now, there's nothing special about a hamburger, been around for centuries. There's nothing special about children's playgrounds. But you put those two things together, which at the end of the day is not that creative, it produces a monumental change in the way people behave. And it's really about finding those innovation ideas that create something special. Another opportunity, I was in Silicon Valley probably 5 or 6 years ago. I met up with a guy called Glenn Edens. Now, you may not have heard of him. He is legally blind, can barely see, used to type on a keyboard on his desktop computer, would lean forward, read what he'd written, lean back, type a bit more, then lean forward, read what he'd written, lean back and type a bit more. Now, he was an engineer. He took a keyboard off a desktop computer, taped it to a screen, connected it up and joined them so that he could actually type and read at the same time. Ironically, that was the foundation of the laptop computer, which hopefully many of you have. This fellow went on to, of course, work with Steve Jobs. He also developed the mouse and a whole bunch of other things. And in fact, I was very lucky. I had a very intimate dinner with him. And after a couple of red wines, I found out the difference between Australian humour and American humour. And I said to him, so besides inventing the laptop and inventing the mouse, was there anything else that you did? I actually thought it was quite humorous, but he didn't share my my thoughts. But anyway, resilience is absolutely key, and so the ability to adapt, prepare for, respond, all of those things, that's important. And that's getting harder and harder. If I look at recent world events, no one expected Brexit to happen. That sort of goes without saying. The migration from the Middle East, the consequences of that action has been just horrific for many countries. And then I think about Donald Trump and the US election process. The day before the election, of course, there were very few commentators that were predicting that there would be a Trump win, and of course we know the answer. But what was probably more surprising is even the people that didn't predict the win, but thought that if he did win, what would happen, were all completely wrong about what happened the next day and the next week and the next month. So when I look at research and I look at the evaluation of what's going to happen in the US and around the globe over the next year or two under a Trump government, I doubt very much that it's going to be correct, because if you can't get it right the day before, then how can we get it right the year before, given the current environment that we're in? Now, in Australia, as I said, budget night today, government stability, both at a federal level and a state level, is probably has never been as shaky as it has been at the moment. We're in a low growth environment. The level of regulation is just incredible at the moment. If you don't believe that, you should come to one of the Suncorp Risk Committee meetings. We literally have 50 or 60 various inquiries and reviews, and these all require huge resources. I see KPMG here today. It requires KPMG and others to participate, give so independent sign-offs and things. It's just a huge burden on the industry and, of course, other industry. Then I look at the weather events. Being Queenslanders, we don't need to talk about that at great length. We know what that means. Investment markets are incredibly volatile. we were talking the other day about what the investment markets might deliver and what our share price might be next year, what sort of return. And look, of course, we don't even know what it's going to do today, let alone over the next year, so that makes it very hard. And of course, the huge amount of disruption that is occurring across all industries at all levels at an incredible pace. But I'm very optimistic about the opportunities that these situations create. As an individual, I'm very comfortable with ambiguity. I like to think I'm reasonably organised as an individual, but I do like ambiguity. I like to be in situations where there's a lot of uncertainty, where there are opportunities that emerge, and things occur that you may not expect. And throughout my career, I remember Tim mentioned I was at Lendlease for 10 years. We used to go on an annual planning strategy getaway, and for some reason, maybe there's a message in this, but each year we turn the organisation upside down at Lendlease, and a lot of us, including me, would come back from the offsite with a new role, sometimes in an entirely different part of the group. I remember moving from the construction team to the financial services team, and very little comparison between the two, but it was sensational. So I got used to a lot of change, and in fact, I think about my fifth year there, I came back in the same role, and my wife said, what happened? And maybe they were just trying to find something that I could actually do in that 10 years. But it sort of built in this love of change and uncertainty, which isn't for everybody. It really means that you have to apply yourself very differently, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Organisations need to be very resilient to the change that I've talked about, and you need to have a culture that is based all around the customer. And I'm not talking about just the words, we're customer-centric, we're focused on the customer is important. It needs to be truly, truly at the heart of everything you do. You need to be able to understand and hear the voice of the customer throughout the organisation and embrace that innovation. You also need to be very agile, and if I think about some examples of what I'm talking about being agile, going back in history, companies did business plans, sometimes 5-year plans, sometimes 10-year plans. They'd produce a nice book, very careful analysis, everything calculated very precisely, profit numbers going out 10, 15 years. These documents are just not any value to an organisation to be able to embrace the change that's occurring. To project out 5 years what might happen is meaningless, even to go 3 years. Tim mentioned that our CFO is in the room. We were looking at last year's plan that we produced, which was a 3-year plan, and I don't think any number looks anything like what we had anticipated even 12 months ago, in a good way, I should add. So it's very interesting. So as we go forward, the organisation that you work in needs to be alone, and it's no use saying that when you look at your core competency or your point of differentiation that it's about customer service or it's about the wonderful culture in the organisation. I meet a lot of other CEOs and I say, so what's special about your organisation? I don't use those words, but something like that. And they say, our one thing that makes us different is our culture, or the one thing that makes us different is our customer service. And to me, customer service, that's right up here, is a given. It's a hygiene factor. If you don't have good customer service, you're doomed anyway. Great culture is not a point of difference. It's something that is essential. Again, a hygiene, it's something that you have to have. It's not a point of difference. You have to be doing something that's very different. It needs to be an Apple-type experience, to use an overused example. The other thing you need to do is to reinvent the organisation on a regular basis and to create value for your customers that is not about just simply a cheaper price. Because if it's about price, you reduce your prices and you get a competitive advantage. your competitors then reduce their prices, so you reduce your prices, they reduce their prices, etc., and you know where that ends up. Typically, almost all of the businesses in that particular game end up disappearing. So before I get into a bit more detail about what I mean by that, let me talk a bit about Suncorp. Now, we've got 9 million customers, which is a large number, and we used to run the organisation in what's called silos, which is, again, usually meant as quite a negative description of an organisation. We had a bank, we had a general insurance company, and we had a life insurance business, and with an individual CEO for each business, and we would run it quite separately. We had scale. We compete on price, like everybody else. We focus on low cost. And you'll know our brands, of course: Suncorp, Amy, GIO, Shannon's, Bingle, Apia, and many, many more. But we had a look at the business, and we lose about 125,000 customers each month. Now, that is something that is a very interesting stat. We were talking with investors last year. I thought I might mention that to our loyal investors, and someone said, "No, look, don't put it in your notes." So I put it in my notes, and they crossed it out in the next draft, and I put it back in. It was crossed out again, and the version I had to walk up on stage with, it was gone again. So I stood up, and just as I was walking up onto the stage, they said, "Do not mention that 125," and of course, I just don't know what happened, but I sort of said, "I'm Michael Cameron, we lose 125,000. And anyway, I was reassured to know that it's not just us, it's the whole industry. This is called churn. It's not just in Australia, it's all around the world. And if you look at insurance and banking and financial services, customers come and go, usually because of price. They're educated that if they see an ad on TV that says we can save you 30%, that when you get your insurance renewal, the first thing you should do is ring around and get a better price. You're educated that if you go in to talk to someone about a home loan and they say 4.5%, that you should actually go and see a broker or have a look through one of the aggregators and try to get a better price. It's all about price, and that's why we see 125,000 people leave the organisation each month. Now, you'll be comforted to know that we get 125,000 new customers each month as well. So just don't rush off and sell your Suncorp shares just yet. But the message is that means there's 250,000 people each month that come and go from Suncorp. Can you imagine how many phone calls, bits of paper, employees that takes to manage that amount of volume of change? And in many ways, it is just not a sustainable model to have 250,000 people come and go through our organisation as new customers or old customers. So what we did was we turned the organisation upside down last year. We started thinking about our customers as customers of the group, not customers of the bank or customers of the insurance business. And that's a monumental change. And when I was getting ready to take over the role about 18 months ago, our chairman, Ziggy Switkowski, said, "Look, you probably should say a few words at the AGM tonight." And I said, "Oh, I think that's totally appropriate." And I said, "Look, I'll just speak for a couple of minutes as the incoming CEO." And someone very kindly wrote a draft for me, just a paragraph, and it said in there, Suncorp's next wave of growth will come from creating value from our 9 million customers. And I said, "Look, I'm actually not going to say that." And they said, "Well, that's what we've been saying. It's our it's our grab to talk about the future, leveraging our 9 million customers." And I said, "Well, look, I'm actually prepared to say the next wave of growth will come from creating value from for our 9 million customers, not from our 9 million customers." And whilst it may sound like a subtle difference, creating value for our customers is really the secret of guaranteeing that Suncorp will be around for another 100 years. And if you think about it, I've got an iPhone, hopefully many of you do as well. I know that I can get a cheaper telephone. Right on cue. It's always good to have props. I usually use animals in this presentation, but the telephone prop is good. But I know I can get a cheaper phone than an Apple phone. But if someone gave me a Samsung phone with a $100 note strapped to it for free, I'm still not interested. I'm not changing from Apple because they create something for me called value, and it's not about price. It's non-price value. And that is the massive change that we're going through in reimagining what financial services can be at Suncorp. And when I say reimagining financial services, I'm talking about a different approach. And when I was a young bloke, I used to go to the circus. I'd watch lions and tigers and elephants jump through hoops and do all sorts of things that animals were never meant to do. And to be honest, I was always thinking this is a bit of a joke. I didn't really find it entertaining because I always felt sorry for the circus animals. And of course, the rest of the world sort of had the same attitude. And these days, it's pretty hard to find a circus. But you do find things like Cirque du Soleil, who reimagined what a circus could be. And that is exactly what we are doing at Suncorp to financial services. Now, we had a recent conference, about this many people in the room, our top sort of a couple of hundred people. And I started off by saying I want everyone to forget what they know about insurance, and I want you to forget what you know about banking. And I think at the time, some of the new starters at least may have thought this guy's absolutely nuts because that's our core business. But if we're going to think digital and we're going to compete and reinvent ourselves on a regular basis, we're competing against other organisations. There is an organisation based in New York. It's an insurance company. It's called Lemonade, and what an obvious name for an insurance company, of course. And they can process a claim for motor vehicles and homes in 2 or 3 seconds. Now, I won't tell you how long it takes us, but it's not 2 or 3 seconds. And that's who we will be competing with very, very soon in Australia. So we need to elevate the customer in the organisation and create a marketplace where our customers can have easy access to a large number of our products and services and brands in one place. A lot of people say to me, okay, look, I've been around a while, I know what that is. That's called cross-sell, bank assurance, all finance. I've heard that strategy, it's an old one. Well, this is not. Cross-sell does not work anywhere in the world. Cross-sell is where you walk into a bank branch to get a bank check and someone says, can I talk to you about life insurance today? And of course you just want to say, get lost. It's just, it's such a bad experience. What we're talking about as far as the Suncorp marketplace is what happens when you go into, say, an IGA store. And in South Brisbane, I live just near one, and my wife always pops in and she says, look, I'm just going to buy some milk today. And I say, look, do you want a hand? She said, look, I'm just getting milk. And of course, she comes out with 16 bags full of orange juice, eggs, bread, newspapers, you name it. And I say, every single time, I say, what happened? I thought you were just getting some milk. And she said, I found a whole bunch of things that we need. Now, that is not cross-sell. There was no one in the IGA store saying, I see that you're buying milk today, can I interest you in some orange juice? It was on a shelf. My wife saw it, we needed it, we bought it. And that is exactly what our Suncorp offer will be, whether it's digital or whether it's in-store. Our new store, which is opening up on the 25th of this month out at Carindale, is a retail store. This is not a bank branch. It is a Suncorp store, and I'd encourage you to go have a look. So what's different about it? Let me explain. We don't employ anyone that knows anything about banking or insurance. We employ retailers. Some of the people that will be working there are from organisations like David Jones and Coles and others. You won't see, we're open 7 days a week, Saturday and Sunday and late nights, so you don't see that. And I would imagine when people in this room go walking through shopping centres, you don't spend a lot of time wandering past the ANZ and the Westpac bank branch saying, I'm just going to have a little bit of a browse and don't they look fantastic? I'll see you in a minute. I'm just going to hang around and sort of look at the bank branches. You don't do that. You walk as fast as you can past the bank branches and you get into where Country Road and all the fun shops are. So this is a retail store. We retailers. It'll have a Suncorp scent pumping through. I'm not joking. Pumping through the air conditioning. And a lot of people say, well, that's kind of strange. Well, if this was a room of retailers, and hopefully there's some retailers in the room, you would know exactly what it means to have the right sort of visual observation, the right sort of things on the shelf, the right sort of approach to attract people into a very pleasant situation. And that's what we'll be doing. So I think we're probably getting close to time, are we? Just a few more minutes. I just want to make sure we've got time for a couple of questions. So, like others, we need to continually adapt. And you'll see our digital offers, be that marketplace. You'll see our stores that are opening will have access to a broad range of products and services about experiences. And nobody wakes up one morning and says, I think this week I'm going to get myself a home loan. You just don't do that. You wake up one morning and you say, this week I'm going to get myself a house or a home. And we are, through our retail stores, are going to help people get themselves a home. We will be offering, in the new store process, information about demographics, about property prices, conveyancing services, property inspection services, obviously home insurance, a loan to help purchase your home, all of the things that you need to, the sort of 16, 17, 18 steps to go from a non-homeowner to a homeowner. And isn't that much more of a retail experience that's going to help you than just having a big sign up, 3.99% home loans here, come and test your price. It's just not sustainable. So we're very excited about the future of the organisation and where we're headed. It's a multi-year journey. We will never get there because we will continually change and update and reinvent and reimagine what we're doing, but this will be a very different approach. Let me just wrap up with a couple of comments. If you think about how much change has occurred in the last 12 months, think back to May 2016 and what has happened in the world, what has happened in Australia, what has happened in Queensland, what has happened in Brisbane, or in fact in your companies in the last 12 months. And think about the speed of change. And just acknowledge for a moment that the pace of change that is happening at the moment will never be this slow again. It will never be slow, as slow as it was this year. So, where will that take us, and how will our companies be prepared to go through that? And how will companies reinvent themselves quick enough to prosper and grow into the future? So Suncorp is reimagining themselves in relation to financial services. We want to remain a trusted organisation. Hopefully you put us in that category. And we also want to make sure that when we talk about disruption, we talk about change, which are all of those things are not easy to handle, that we're well equipped and we have the right culture and the right people to be able to deal with the new skills required to be able to navigate ourselves and help our customers navigate themselves through the journeys that they encounter. So the question that you may have been asking yourself is, what will your company look like when you go through a process of reimagining what your industry might be like? But maybe a more important question for you to think about today is, what will your company look like if you don't reimagine the future of your industry or your company?